I want to talk tonight about why Kerry has not been part of the 1916 story to date, and I hope in this book we've gone some way to providing a corrective for that. And the charge has sometimes been made that Kerry was not proactive, particularly around the period of 1916. Whenever Kerry is mentioned in relation to 1916, it's usually about B. O'Reilly, mentioning that he was from Kerry, or Thomas Ashe, that he was from Kerry, or various other personalities who were fighting in Dublin. But what we wanted to do in this book is look back at what was happening in Kerry between 1914 and 1916 to volunteers. In 1913 in Dublin, you find Irish volunteer companies springing up all around Kerry, in Beaufort, in Fireys, in Muckross, in Fossa, Lestree, Glenflesk, and all around the county, but also in the bigger towns, in Killarney and Tralee, and from there spreading out to Ventry, Dingle, back west, except of course from the very beginning the GAA has a fundamental and really central part to play in the construction of our Irish Ireland identity. So from cultural nationalism you can see a trajectory into militant nationalism. And the formation, for example, of the Tree Corps of the Irish Volunteers had Austin Stack, who was head of the Kerry County Board, at its centre. By April 1914, the RIC reported that over 1,000 men were active members of the volunteers in Kerry. That's within 4 or 5 months of the formation of the Irish Volunteers. As they became more widespread and started to recruit young and active men, it was inevitable that a large proportion of their membership would come from the GAA, including men like Kerry's starred midfielder Pat Aeroplane O'Shea from Castle Gregory, and Dix Fitzgerald, the Kerry captain, who was an officer in the Killarney. 700 volunteers parade in Tralee, and Austin Stack assumes the leadership of the Irish Volunteers in Kerry, and by that time, at the end of July, you have 1,500 members who are reviewed in Killarney by Captain Talbot Crosby. So all of this is building up. It's like a pressure cooker. It's building up what is happening, not just in Kerry, but throughout the rest of the country. In September 1914, a muster of 200 men from Cahersiveen in Valencia took place in Dingle, where they were addressed by Ernest Bligh, a member of the IRB. So you can already see the IRB are beginning to look at Kerry. And I think from early, certainly 1915, Kerry is becoming part of the plans of the IRB. Now, they are a secretive organisation, so they don't reveal their plans to everybody. But it's interesting that you have very important members of the IRB in Kerry throughout 1915, like Ernest Bligh, who has been living and working in Lispool. And he told the gathering of the Dingle volunteers, or the volunteers in Dingle, that while hitherto they might have looked on drilling as a form of recreation, it was in fact now forming an army to fight for the national freedom of Ireland. Ernest Bligh returns to Kerry in early 1915, and he gives a report that says, Kerry at the beginning of 1915 is extremely good. There are half a dozen active companies in the Dingle Peninsula, the Dingle Company having 20 or 30 rifles. There's a so-called battalion in Tralee with perhaps 100 men. They also have a number of rifles. A fair-sized company in Killarney, a good company in Cahersiveen, and a small company in Castle Island and in Listowel. In all cases, the Kerry companies were growing. And it is obvious that in a lot of places it would be possible to form new companies very soon. So throughout 1914, these Kerry volunteers, who are now supporting the MacNeil stance, they are the Irish volunteers who refuse to support the war effort, continue to recruit and drill and hold parades and tighten their grip around the loyalty of Kerrymen. 1916 was inevitable, but the planning of it is what is of interest of us when looking to Kerry. And why Kerry was picked? Well, for lots of reasons. It's further away from the authorities in Dublin Castle. But because of the good organisation of the Irish Volunteers and Cumann in Kerry, and because in lots of ways the IRB thought Kerry would be a place where the guns could have been imported safely and distributed around the country, Kerry is picked to be the place that the Aud will sail into once it sets sails from Germany. The plan was the arms shipment was to be brought ashore at Fenit Harbour once the Aud had arrived in Tralee Bay. Once the arms were on shore, they were to be distributed among the volunteers in Munster. There was a plan to take the Tralee GPO, the rail station and military barracks, by the Kerry volunteers in order to control communications in the county, disarm the local RIC and military. Proclamation was to be put out in Tralee, and the Irish Republic was going to be proclaimed in Tralee outside the GPO, similarly to what actually happened in Dublin. The Kerry volunteers were then to link up with their colleagues in Cork, Limerick, Clare and Galway. In cooperation with the volunteers in Leinster, they were then to devote themselves to disrupting communications and preventing the movement of British reinforcements from the country into Dublin. Then Stack was charged with formulating the plan to land the German weapons and distribute them across Munster. And he used his local contacts, particularly with Pat Airplane O'Shea and Kennedy, who came back to the Dingle volunteers, to begin to get that plan in place. That's what doing this book has really brought forward. There actually was a plan, and Kerry was integral to it. Unfortunately, as we all know now, that plan fell apart. The Odd left Germany and arrived too early. It arrived in on the 20th of April on Holy Thursday. It was not supposed to come in until Sunday. So it's sailing around and obviously garners the suspicion of the British ships that are protecting the west coast. The IRB team, who were sent down to seize a wireless radio from the Atlantic College, take that wrong turn at Ballykassan and go off the pier, and 3 of them drown. Ironically, they were getting the wireless to contact the Odd, but the Odd didn't actually have radio equipment. So it was, in some ways, a Saher and Ashka, I suppose. But they were also going to use the radio equipment to communicate with Dublin, not just the Odd. So that radio equipment was very important. And then, of course, Roger Casement lands in Bannostrand. And their landing was very rough. He'd fallen out of the boat several times. He was sick with malaria. He was drenched. So he stays in McKenna's Fort, as it was then, Casement's Fort, while Monteith and Bailey go on to Tralee. He's found there and arrested. Later that day, Austin Stack, who has been looking for Casement, goes to Ballymullen Barracks to see what he can do and is himself arrested. So now you have real problems. McNeill now realises that a rising is going to happen. He's been told the rifles are coming in. He then finds out that the rifles are gone. He hears about Ballykassan Pier, and he then issues the countermand. However, in Kerry, this is not received until after the order in the Kerryman that all the volunteers are to form up for manoeuvres on the Sunday. And of course, now we know of the famous march of the West Kerry volunteers over the Conor Bass on Easter Saturday night. A contingent of 40 armed men marched in, or began their march from Annascaul, from West Kerry onto Dingle, onto Annascaul in camp, where they were joined by volunteers. They marched from Ballyferriter, Dingle and Lispool, up the Conor Pass, not on a day like this. Apparently it was driving rain and wind, and they were soaked to the skin. Many of them with very bad boots. The boots fell apart, were soaked. They had to stuff grass in their boots. They arrive in Tralee, 100 strong at this stage, with sore legs, starving, drenched, where they're met by the volunteers in the rink. They remain in the rink at Tralee until Easter Monday, awaiting orders, and when they don't come, the Ballymcgilligan volunteers go home and take Monteith with them, where he spends 6 months in hiding. The Dingle volunteers, the West Kerry volunteers, go home on the train. They didn't have to walk all the way back again. But they remain under orders, and they may remain waiting for what is going to happen. And that really is the end of Kerry's participation in the rising in a physical sense. But it's not the end in Dublin, where you have Kerry men and women participating, including, of course, Thomas Ashe in Ashburn, the most successful commandant, really, of the Easter Rising. He's the one who holds out the longest, and he's the one who succeeds in taking an RIC station. The O'Rahilly, of course, O'Connor, Mulvihill and Shortus all died at the end of Easter week in that charge, that faithful charge up Moore Street. But you also have Cumann women from Kerry. Anna Barton from Tralee, who's married to Frank Fahy, is serving in the forecourts. Mary O'Connell, direct descendant of Daniel O'Connell from the Spa in Tralee, is serving in the GPO. Marion Cregan, who had been a courier between Sean McDermott and Austin Stack, had spent the week trying to get back to Dublin. So you can see, outside of Kerry, Kerry men and women are participating, and we have over 100 of them. When the rising comes to an end, what happens in Kerry, I think, also adds to what will become the War of Independence. Even though the Kerry men and women in Kerry haven't participated physically in a rising, they're all, especially the men, are rounded up and arrested. Large-scale arrests of local volunteers are conducted. A significant number of GAA officials and county players, such as Paddy Cahill, Dick Fitzgerald, DJ Griffin of Castlemaine, Harry Spring of Fireys, Willie Mullins of Tralee, Pat O'Shea, J.F. O'Shea, the Portmagee captain, are all arrested and deported to Frangach in Wales. In fact, there are 37 Kerry men held in this camp. In 1917, Thomas Ashe, Austin Stack and the rest of them were released, and they hold an extraordinary commemoration to Roger Casement at Bannistrand, the first commemoration, I suppose, the 99th of which we've now commemorated this year. And in lots of ways it was about reinvigorating the Kerry volunteers by holding that commemoration. And you have the volunteers there and Cumann Amon. But Ashe is arrested soon after and dies while being force-fed in Mountjoy jail. His funeral had over 70 Kerry volunteers in Dublin. They had travelled up there for the funeral, and other funerals, representative funerals, were held throughout Kerry. The Chief Secretary of Ireland said that Ashe's death did more to stimulate Sinn Féinism and disorder in Ireland than anything I knew. So after 1917, the Kerry volunteers who had been ready in 1916, joined by many hundreds of others, now stood ready for what was coming. And of course what was coming was the War of Independence.
Dingle and West Kerry can be very proud that the cover image on our book is a picture of a large group of volunteers gathered in Dingle in either 1914 or 1915. And for us as editors of the book, we think it sort of captures in many ways the story of the book and the preparedness, I suppose, of so many of the volunteers in Kerry at the time to participate in what was envisaged would be the rising. Whereas Mary mentioned the importance of the Kerry story overall to the national story and the story of the rising generally, one of the objectives we had in the book was to include as many of the Kerry people as possible who were involved in however a relatively minor way. I suppose a lot of the well-known figures like Thomas Ashe, like Austin Stack, like the O'Rahilly would be much better known, but we were very fortunate in our research to have access to records compiled by Paul who's a North Kerry historian who had accumulated a list of about 100 men who were arrested after the rising. Mary referred to a series of mass arrests that took place after the rising, and many Kerry men and women indeed were arrested. So we wanted to ensure that their stories were told as much as possible. So one of the things we have in the book is short biographies of the Kerry men and women who were arrested after the rising. Just to mention a couple of them, and obviously you can be reading them for yourselves. There was quite significant volunteer activity in Castle Gregory in the lead up to the rising, and the head of the volunteers there was Timothy Ty Brosnan. And a week after the rising in Dublin on Sunday the 30th of April, despite orders prohibiting assemblies of volunteers, he and 6 or 7 other volunteers, including Abel O'Mahony, Michael McKenna, James Kennedy, Michael Duhigg, Daniel O'Shea and John Brosnan, Tyg's brother, were arrested and taken to prison. As well as that, in Uniscall there was quite an active company of volunteers as well, and a few days after the rising, James Coonahan, the leader of the volunteers there, was arrested and taken to prison. Quite a number of Dingle figures feature in the book, or the greater Dingle area, I suppose. James Fitzgerald from Spole, who was very active with Ernest Blythe and Thomas Ashe in forming the volunteers in the West Kerry area. Likewise, Thomas Fitzgerald from Spore Old Dingle, who was a builder and who was arrested after the rising. Maurice Griffin, who was born in Dingle and who would be better known as the editor, one of the editors of the Kerryman newspaper, and the Kerryman took a very strong line or view, I suppose, on in the lead up to the rising, and he was arrested in May 1916 as well, shortly after the rising. a couple of others here who I have tabbed on the pages. Michael Moriarty, or Micheál Moriarty from Green Street in Dingle, who was probably one of the most prominent figures in the IRB in West Kerry, and he was very involved with Austin Stack in making preparations for the landing of arms in Tralee Bay at Easter weekend. Likewise, another very interesting figure, a man called Henry Vincent O'Donoghue, who was born in Dingle but who spent much of his life in Annascaul, and he was in Dublin during Easter week, and on Easter Monday he joined the garrison at St Stephen's Green, and he later returned to Kerry and was a GP in Annascaul up to his death in 1959. And last but by no means least, a figure well known outside of politics and outside of this period, An Seoach Pádraig Ó Siochrú from Burnham, who was born in 1883 and who was very well known in later life as an Irish language enthusiast and a very prolific writer, writing under the pen name An Seoach. And he was instrumental in forming the volunteers in Killarney and in forming a number of volunteer companies around the county, and later, of course, went on to become a senator, where he was appointed by Eamon de Valera. So as well as telling their stories, we also include in the book some of the lists of names which are included in the very accessible and available online archives now, such as the Military History Archives. So, for example, there is a list from the material at the time of the volunteers from West Kerry who marched to Tralee on Easter Saturday in 1916. In this book, to ensure that not alone is the Kerry story told and comprehensively told, we believe, but that the importance of the key figures in Kerry and the men and women who were prepared to play their part had the rising gone ahead as planned, to ensure that their stories are told, and that we hope that in doing so that we've done testament to what they did 100 years ago, and we hope that it will inform and encourage people to discuss what happened in 1916, and we hope that you enjoy the read.
Oh yeah, and we might see you tomorrow with Card.